November 2018 webinar disclaimers. We are not attorneys. We are not offering legal advice. When you have legal questions, hire an attorney. This is the PI Education Monthly webinar for November 2018. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Today, communication, words, how to talk pretty. PI Education offers these monthly webinars every month on the fourth Thursday of the month, except, of course, November because of Thanksgiving and all that stuff. They're free. They're informative. They're a way for you to get to know us and us to get to know you. We're glad you're here. A little bit about the structure of this webinar. We'll take a break at about the halfway point. I'll go on and on about Pursuit Magazine and PI Education. There's a promo code in it for you, so stay with us throughout the entire webinar. If you need to leave to take a break or for any other reason, don't worry about missing anything. We keep the recorded webinar up here on our YouTube channel for you to come back to again and again. While we're at it, just underneath your video screen, there's a subscribe button. Go ahead and click subscribe for the YouTube channel. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps us out a great deal to have more subscribers on the YouTube channel. I'm thrilled to be joined today by my favorite human, Kim Green. Kim is a freelance writer and a public radio producer. Her work has appeared in Fast Company, Parade, Roads and Kingdoms, Hemispheres, and the Nashville Scene. She's been on NPR's Weekend Edition, Nashville Public Radio, Marketplace, and NPR's Here and Now. She's also the managing editor of Pursuit Magazine, our very own online publication for professional investigators. Before she became a writer, Kim was a flight instructor here in Nashville. We actually met at the airport on the tarmac out by an old, tired Cessna 172. It's a good story. Maybe you can hear it sometime over cocktails at a random bar. She's also co-translated and edited a memoir by a Soviet combat airwoman from World War II. The book is called Red Sky, Black Death. It was published in 2009. And let's see if I can pop a picture of that up here just so that you can see. Here's a copy of the book. And it is available on Amazon. If you go to Amazon.com, you can order this book, Red Sky, Black Death. It's a fantastic tale about Anna Yegorova, a female combat pilot who flew combat missions in World War II for the Soviet Air Force. Kind of a badass. Amazon.com, go get yourself a copy of Red Sky, Black Death. Kim Green is the one who translated that book, and I know she will kind of soft sell this, but she did the lion's share of the creative writing on the process. I think it's a good book. Full disclosure, Kim Green is not only the managing editor of Pursuit Magazine, she's also my wife. So Kim, thank you for being here today with us. We're tickled that you're here. I kind of gave people an idea of what you do. You're a writer, you're an editor. You put together the book for Anna Yegorova called Red Sky, Black Death. What are you working on these days?
Hi, Hal. First of all, I'm really glad to be joining my favorite person, and I really appreciate everybody who's spending their time out there watching us today and talking with us today. So thank you to everyone. And let me also say, before I get to what I'm working on, if you're wondering what any of that Hal just said has to do with a PI's work and a PI's life, let me add a couple of things. Number one, when Hal started his PI company, I also got a PI license with him. And for the first few years, we worked together and did surveillance. And I learned a lot about the industry and found it wonderful and fascinating, which I feel maybe qualifies me a little bit better to be the managing editor of Pursuit and to help edit your stories and help you tell your stories to the community. And also, obviously, the work of a journalist and writer is related to and similar to the work of a private investigator. Writing a book or writing an article or telling a radio story, it's an investigation as well. We go interview people and dig through the past, and we dig through facts and maybe even look up public records, just like you guys do. So that's the relevance. As for what I'm working on now, by the way, you may have noticed in the past year, Pursuit we've not posted quite as many stories as usual, and my apologies for that. I've been writing a big book draft, and that's taken up all my time. So I was hired to co-write the memoir of a Cambodian survivor and social entrepreneur. Her name is Chanta. She's also become my good friend. And her story is of surviving war and becoming a refugee and losing everything, and then ultimately going back home to start a social enterprise for women, a silk weaving social enterprise. It's a really beautiful, sad, difficult, painful, and hopeful story. And we're also telling it through her recipes, her family recipes. So there's a lot of food storytelling, and I had to do a lot of studying. I didn't know much about the culture and the history and even the cuisine of Cambodia, so I had to dig deep and read a lot and learn a lot about that, and also hundreds of hours of interviews. So again, I think that's relevant to a PI's work and a PI's life.
Absolutely, no doubt. And Kim, I think you tend to undersell the things you're working on sometimes. For those of you out there in the crowd, we have one fellow out in Texas. I think he's out of Waco, Texas, who has attended, I think, most of these webinars. He's usually a pretty smart guy, but he did say just now that he's glad to finally get to meet the brains behind the Hal Humphreys operation. So that's Jason Addis out in Texas. Jason, thank you for being with us. And you're absolutely right. Kim is the brains behind the operation. No doubt about it. We want to talk today about communication skills for private investigators. We have discussed this topic on a number of occasions, kind of tangentially with other people on the webinar. But today we wanted to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into communication skills for private investigators. I think one of the things I see a lot of times is private investigators putting together reports and memos that are kind of rough to read. They're not the most engaging writing. And quite honestly, for private investigators, our writing doesn't have to be like, novel level writing. And quite honestly, we shouldn't be. But there's some things we're going to talk about today that I think you can take this afternoon and apply to your work and your business and maybe see some benefits out of those things. One of the first things Kim and I wanted to talk about is in PI communications. And this is one of the topics that we've touched on before, but I want to go into it because I think we've got some really good examples here. Is kind of the front of the house for a PI company, which for most of us ends up being a website, your web presence, and how you do that. Kim, we got a couple of examples of websites that I want to brag on as being kind of really good examples of how you can present yourself as a professional. And I do have Pursuit Magazine up on the screen. This is one thing you can do as a professional investigator. You can write for Pursuit Magazine, and I know for a fact Kim would be thrilled to have more people tell their stories through Pursuit Magazine. But let's go really quickly to New Hope Investigations. Kim, tell us a little bit about this website and what you like about it.
This website is really simple. I do kind of like the what do you call it? This long scroll screen. I like the big wide image. I really like her logo up there in the top left, New Hope Investigations. Not that there's anything wrong with the eyeball and the magnifying glass logo that you see so much, or the Sherlock hat, but there's a lot of that out there, and so seeing something different is great. And that particular logo relates to her specialty, which is adoption searches and family reunification. And so I love the fact that she is so, you can see from her website who she is, and it's so well defined. She does different kinds of investigation, but really focuses on adoption and family reunification, and that is clear immediately.
Right, and I want to be really clear up front here. This is the website of Rochelle Davis. She's a private investigator. over in Missouri. She has been on a webinar with us. She's a fantastic investigator. Oddly enough, she's relatively new to the business and already has kind of put herself out there as kind of a thought leader. And the way she's done this is through her blog. She shares her experiences and her knowledge and the things she learns. She's transparent about the way she tells her stories. She's honest when she says things like, I didn't really know about this until I did this, and I learned this from it. And she shares with people kind of her process, and she does it in a really open and engaging way. So this is a really good example, I think, of a private investigator blog, and it's simple. It's nice and clean. You scroll down and you see the blog entries. You got the older posts here. She has a contact thing at the bottom. It's just it's simple and it's clean. The other thing is it's well written. She does a good job of telling stories. Let's go to another website that we brag on quite a bit. This is Brian Willingham's website over at Diligentia Group. And this is one thing I want to point out really quickly. One of the problems I see with PI websites sometimes is you'll see a private investigator that have their website up, and they'll have like areas of expertise or services offered. And they'll have upwards of 20, 25 different areas of expertise. Brian has 3 things that he does: background investigations, due diligence investigations, legal investigations. 3 simple, well-defined areas that he is an expert in. Now, underneath each one of those things, there are several like tendrils that he can do, and he is an expert in a number of things. But on his website, he says he's an expert in background, due diligence, and legal investigations, and that's nice and simple and clean. Kim, thoughts about Brian's website?
I love Brian's website too, of course. I'm a little bit subjective because I just really like Brian. But I got to know, like so many of us, I got to know Brian through his writing for Pursuit and through his writing for his blog. He's probably, I mean, he's definitely one of, if not the best PI blogger out there, because first of all, he's a good writer. He is clear and knows how to use the language, but he's also specific. There's nothing sort of vague or general about his blog posts. He, like he said in his, one of his recent webinars with you, I think from last year, the reason that he blogs is, number one, to get the word out about himself. It's a marketing tool, but it's also to let people know who he is and to be very clear about it. And as he said, some of his colleagues get a little bit mad at him about, they think, sharing too many of our secrets, too many PI secrets. But he says, look, they're not really secrets anyway. I'm sharing knowledge that gets me a little bit of goodwill, but it also explains to potential clients who I am, he says. Anybody who reads Brian's blog is not going to try to hire him to do work that he doesn't do. They're not going to try to hire him to break into their ex-girlfriend's apartment and hack her computer, because it's very clear on his blog that he's not going to do that. I think that I feel the same way, and he's been doing that for a long time. Rochelle Davis, like you said, Hal, is a more recent addition to the community. Her blog quickly developed a great following because she too is a good writer. She's very clear, and her message it's very personal. In one of her early blog posts, she told us that the reason that she started doing adoption searches is that she has her own personal story of adoption with her son. And so you read 3 blog posts of Rochelle's or 3 blog posts of Brian's, and you feel like you know who they are, and you want to get to know them, and maybe you want to hire them. So I think they're really effective.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I wanted to pop up, in talking about websites and kind of things that work and things that don't work. You don't have to be a blogger to have a good, clean web presence. You don't have to post things to your website on a daily basis, although if that's what you want to do, it's certainly helpful. I have found that for me personally, just having a well-designed, simple website that is basically, it's a verification page. It's where potential clients can go and just see, what it is that I do and make sure, verify that I'm actually an investigator, that I'm actually out there doing the work. And this is my current website, which is a pretty simple website. And, you know, it basically talks about kind of our theory of investigation, the way we go about things. There's a photograph of me on the page, and a little story about me, areas of expertise: defend, find, educate, witness. 4 areas. We've got several things underneath there that we can do inside of those areas. And then we've got some blog posts and simple things like that. This website is from strikingly.com. It's a really easy website to put together and build and you know, kind of get it done quickly. It's pretty seamless. And again, you know, the writing, I don't update this as a blog very often. I think I've got 2 or 3 blog posts on here. But for me, my website ends up being kind of the place where I can send potential clients to show them that I am actually a real live investigator, tell them a little bit about myself, my experience, those kind of things. So you can use the website in a number of different ways. We have a question from the audience. I think, Kim, this is probably best for you. How long should a blog post be before you think the reader loses interest? So I think we're talking about word count there. What's kind of the optimal length of a blog post?
I think the optimal length is something like 600 words. That's enough to get to really dig into, you know, to really get to the point of a subject, cover it a little bit. But I don't know, it probably takes you less than 5 minutes to read 600 words. You don't have to scroll down very much. And that's about perfect. In Pursuit, we occasionally will publish something up to 2,000 words. That starts to get pretty long. If we publish a 2,000 word piece, it's usually because it is very in-depth and someone has done some reporting and there's a lot of detail in the story. But I find, like, I would say anywhere between 500 and 1,000 words, there's some wiggle room there, is about right.
Yeah, and I think you know, Brian Willingham and I've had this conversation on a number of occasions about length of blog posts. You know, short blog posts are good blog posts. If you can say a thing concisely and quickly and get a point across, and people can go to your blog and read the thing quickly, that's great. If you got a really crazy, interesting story, or if you're just like a wicked good writer and you can belch out a couple thousand words that will keep people's interest, by all means do that. But if you're going to host, yeah, go ahead.
I agree with everything that you just said, and as I think about examples in Pursuit, when we post stories that are 2,000 words plus, it's usually something like you said. It's not going to be just an informational how-to. It's usually going to be a how-to that wraps around a lot of anecdotes, personal story. You know, there'll be a section of personal story, and then there'll be a section of what does it mean and why does it matter. So, for example, John Nardizzi, a Boston private investigator, a couple of years ago, wrote an incredible criminal defense piece, but he used examples from several cases. So he really needed 2,000 plus words to tell that story since he was using so many examples. And then there was another piece we did, I believe it was by Steve Morrow, and it was about his wife's search for her real mother. And that was an incredible, beautiful personal story with lots of details and lots of narrative. So we actually did 3 parts, each of them 2,000 words, and that story was worth 6,000 words. But we did it in 3 pieces because that's a lot of scrolling. And one more thing I'll say is, if you do decide that your story merits a longer word count, one thing that you can do to help readers out is add headings, maybe even add like a pull quote, by which I mean choose a great quote, and usually most blog, WordPress and Strikingly will let you put sort of a quotation box. So as people are scrolling down, if they see some images, if they see a quotation box, if they see subheadings, that just breaks up all that text for the eye and makes it a little bit easier to read. One thing about images, though, you probably know this, you cannot just take an image off the internet and drop it into your blog. Please know that you need to find out who owns the image and either get permission or choose something that's in the public domain, or use a service like Pixabay or some of the other services that offer free shareable stock photos.
Yeah, and there are a lot of resources out there for free stock photos. If you happen to have a strikingly website, and I'm sure there are other providers who do the same kind of thing, but Strikingly actually has an agreement with one of the free photo websites. So when you're on Strikingly, if you want an image, you can just pull it out of the Strikingly tool bag and drop it in. We have a question here from Andy Adams, and this is a good one. I'll start this one, and Kim, you can chime in if you think you have something to add to it. Andy Adams says, I have always struggled with having personal information, picture, bio, etc., on my website versus staying somewhat private. Thoughts? Here's the thing that I would say, Andy. It really is up to the person what they feel comfortable with. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your personal information, if you're not on social media, if you're not, engaging with people on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all those things, and your website is just for your kind of PI website where you're going to verify that you have a business and you're actually there, you don't have to share personal details. There's one of the things in a presentation we've done a couple times on communication skills. We talk about the idea of there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's not just one simple right way to do things. I would say if you're going to do a website that doesn't have any personal information, keep it really simple and clean, and keep it to the point. This is what we do. These are the services we provide, and here's how you get in touch with us. I think that's one way you can do it. But whether or not you share your personal thoughts, we've got Stephanie, our operations manager, is in on the webinar with us today, and she said, I think it depends on your niche and your specialty too. That's absolutely right. So Rochelle Davis does a lot of connecting family members who have been lost through adoption processes and stuff like that. There's absolutely no reason why she would need to be secretive about what she does. For a surveillance operative, I can see where that might make a difference. As Kim mentioned, when we first got our PI licenses, we did some surveillance together. And I will say this, couples that surveil together stay together. It is such, for the folks out there that do surveillance work, you know what I'm talking about when I say surveillance can be mind numbing. You sit in one spot, or you're trying to follow somebody, and doing it with your partner, your life partner, man, it will either tear you apart or bring you closer together. But if you're doing surveillance work, or if you're doing kind of covert workplace investigation, stuff like that, you might not want to have a bunch of stuff out there on the internet. That's totally up to you. I will say this, for me personally, if you're going to have social media engagement through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and a website with a blog on it, I find it best just to be totally transparent. Here's who I am. Here's what I do. Here are my thoughts on X, Y, and Z. Moving on, Kim, to social media, since we've kind of gotten into that topic just a little bit, what are some best practices for social media? I know you handle kind of the Facebook and Twitter feed for Pursuit Magazine. What are some of your rules for engaging on social media?
Engaging on social media, like you said, as a business presence or a media presence rather than personally. To me, I prefer not to get political, because that alienates half the audience right away. And I don't think anybody needs to know my personal opinions via the Pursuit Twitter feed, for example. So I just don't think people need to hear it. For Pursuit, I think what's most useful is I have met a lot of my favorite fellow professionals via the Twitter feed. So a lot of what I do on social media is more listening than talking. I scroll through and I hear what the other folks I respect are saying, and sometimes I may even reach out and say, hey, would you write about that for us? And there are a lot of great feeds that I could recommend, if somebody would like to some ideas for who to follow. I follow Rochelle Davis and Brian Willingham, writing PIs. That's Colleen Collins out in Denver, who is also she's a PI. Her husband's a lawyer, and she's a writer as well. Oliver Maxson, he's a criminal defense guy. Ami Tobin, Mason investigations, a lot more where that came from. I also follow a lot of criminal justice journalists like Pamela Koloff, because I learn a lot from those feeds. I learn what's going on in criminal justice world. But I also share things. I like to spend some of that, let's say social capital, sharing things from fellow investigators, sharing articles by journalists I respect, and then just saying good job to people. I think if you spend 90 to 95% of your virtual ink on goodwill and congratulations and sharing what other people's work, then you earn the right just for the rest of that 5% of your energy to say, oh, here's an article we posted, here's an event we're hosting. But you can't sell all the time. Otherwise, I think nobody will listen.
Right. And I think that's a fantastic point. The idea that the more you share, the more you have you earn the right to push your own stuff. Here's another thing. I've got a sign up on the wall in the yoga room in our backyard, and it says very clearly on the top, share, brag on others. And I think that goes to one of the things we were going to get into a little bit deeper, is the idea of you can have the best website in the world. You can have, the slickest Twitter feed and, have somebody manage all those things for you. But one of the best ways to gain credibility and an audience is to share and brag on other people that you see out there that are doing a really good job. It does a couple things. Number one, when I share a story from Pam Koloff, a little bit of that smart rubs off on me somehow magically. But when you start sharing things that other people have done and you start bragging on those people in a public forum like that, it's a way to build relationships. We live in this digital age. I used to go to the bar and meet people there. I don't go to the bar as much as I used to. Number one, I don't have time to. Number two, the hangovers are so much worse after you get 50 years old. And number three, I build friendships online. Brian Willingham and I met online. The first time we ever met in person, we were both traveling overseas, and we, through the internet, said, hey, I'm in this town. And he said, oh my gosh, I'm in that town too. And we got together. So at the end of the day, it all ends up being about connections and relationships. And the idea of communications, clear, concise communications, comes into play there as well, building those networks of friendships. You've got to be clear in your communication with people. So moving on, it is about the halfway point. I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to mute you, Kim. This is one of the few times I get to actually do this. It's like make you not be able to talk, which I don't ever want to do. But I'm going to mute you for a second. You're watching the PI Education Monthly Webinar for November 2018. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. We're thrilled you're here. I've got my wife and partner, Kim Green, on the webinar with us. We're going to be talking about communication skills for private investigators for the rest of the hour. And we're going to dig into some kind of meat and bones kind of stuff about how to be more clear in your writing. We're going to talk about some things you can do in memos and reports. We're going to show some examples of memos and reports and good writing and bad writing. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, pieducation.com. We provide online continuing education for private investigators. I strongly encourage you to go to pieducation.com and sign up for any of the courses we have on there. As a special incentive, from now until I think December 25th is when the expiry date is, Jolly 18, Jolly 18, not case sensitive, no spaces. Jolly 18 gets you 15% off of any course and any course bundle you want to take from pieducation.com. So hang on to that discount code, Jolly 18. One more thing I want to talk about really quick before we get back into the meat of this this webinar. Kim and I have been working for a couple of years. I say a couple of years because I don't want to seem like we've been working on it for as long as we actually have. A course on communication skills for private investigators. That course is scheduled to launch next week. The course is chock full of really good advice on how to do everything from spell correctly to use grammar properly, to be concise, to be clear, to avoid the passive voice. There are examples of memos. There are examples of reports. It's going to be a fantastic course. I'm really excited about it. I'm proud of it. And that should drop first to middle of next week. And this Jolly 18 discount code will get you 15% off of that course. So again, this is the November 2018 webinar for PI Education. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host, and I just unmuted Kim Green, our guest. Kim, we're going to continue talking about communication skills for private investigators. Let's talk a little. We've kind of gone through the front of the house business. You know, how to present yourself to the public and appear to be a professional. How to build networks, those kind of things. Let's talk about the meat and bones of writing reports. And we didn't really brief this part of the webinar very detailed, but I want to talk about some things that we can do as investigators to be better report writers and better communicators. So the first thing I want to talk about is writing emails and writing memos. You know this about me. I know that a lot of folks know this about me. I'm not ashamed of it, but I was diagnosed as dyslexic years ago. I have some serious troubles with spelling. How do I fix that?
You can ask me to read your emails and your reports, which of course we do that very often. Opposite superpowers. He is a fantastic navigator and always seems to know where he is. I don't know if he is looking at moss on trees or what exactly it is. And I'm not bad. We're both pilots, so I kind of have to be able to navigate. But Hal is some kind of a genius navigator, so I kind of rely on him for that. Spelling is easy for me. My brain just does it. I don't know why. I'm lucky in that. And so I think the easy way is for Hal to call me and say, hey, look, I've got this one email to a lawyer. I'm concerned about it, and I would like for you to look over it. And I'll look over it, and my eyeballs will see things that his missed. And the same thing for reports. Maybe you have someone in your office who can do that for you, or maybe you have somebody at the house who can do that for you. But that's, even if you don't, it is okay. Spell check can help, but of course, spell check doesn't help you for words like two and two, or there and there, or your and your. On that, all I know to tell you is to slow yourself down and know what you're not great at and pay extra attention to those things. I don't think that every single email, for example, has to be slaved over and perfect, because when you're just sending off a quick email to a client who you've had for years, they know your work, they know your intelligence already. You don't have to make a great impression. I think the emails and the letters and the communications that you really have to work hard to get right are the first impression ones. You know, like if you're sending a note to someone who you really want to work for and you're proposing a collaboration, that email needs to be not only spelled correctly and written correctly, but it should be succinct and well composed, because this is the first thing this person is ever going to know about you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, there are a couple of situations where you want to make sure you got it absolutely right. Number one is the first impression email or letter or whatever you're going to send. Another thing is, you know, as investigators, if we're writing memos for criminal defense cases, there's a really good chance that's never going to see the light of day. It is an internal memo for the defense team. And there are some protections as attorney work product that really very rarely gets out to the other side or to court. Certainly, you wouldn't want many of those memos to be out there in the public record. But if you're working on civil cases and you're putting together an investigative report, either as an expert or as a surveillance operative, or a workplace investigator or something like that, if you're working on reports that are going to be submitted to the court, you probably want to get those right too. And that's another case where it's really good to have an editor that you can go to and say, hey, can you put your eyes on this thing? Here's the thing. I can't spell to save my life, but I can take the time. earlier in the day and make sure that it gets as many things spelled right as possible. But the problem is, as you write a longer report, you spend so much time with it that you can't even see the words anymore. You see a paragraph and you know what you said in that paragraph, so you skip to the next paragraph. A good editor can come in and see things with a fresh set of eyes. I want to spend a little bit of time. Yeah, go ahead.
I think also the extra set of eyes, even if the extra set of eyes don't belong to a fantastic speller, not only will they see maybe a spelling problem or a word you've just forgotten to type in that your brain sees because you know it should be there, they may also see logical gaps in your argument. They may also see the thing that you know and you think is in your report because you know it, but you didn't actually put it in words into the report. So, you know, just having a second pair of eyes attached to a brain that doesn't know all the information that you know is very helpful. And I think that that's especially helpful in a really, really long document, which can sometimes become an information dump. That person might be able to help you cut that report down or cut your memo down to exactly the information you need.
Right. And a really good example of that is, you know, week before last, I was working on an investigation and I'd done a bunch of social media investigations, and I'd spent a lot of time on these two specific blogs. And one of them was still active, and the person was posting, you know, 200 posts per day. So I just picked a random day and said, I'm not going to analyze this after November the 12th. And I put November the 12th in the report, but I never actually said, I'm stopping my review of this on November 12th, because I just kind of assumed that everybody knew that because I put everything up until the 12th. Well, some stuff happened between the 12th and the 21st that was pretty important to the case, and the lawyer didn't know that I had truncated my research as of the 12th because I didn't articulate that. And if I'd had someone else look at the report, if I had Kim give it a quick once over, she might have said, hey, you know, what happened after the 12th? Did she stop using the blog? Did she stop posting? And I would have said, no, she's still posting, but I had to pick a stop date at some point. So yeah, having someone else look at the thing is always useful. Andy Adams says, the use of templates can really save time, save reports, emails, etc., and reuse them when appropriate. I agree 100% with that, Andy. I will say this: in my first 20-something years as a professional doing due diligence work for financial institutions, I did a lot of real estate appraisal work for large projects, and we had templates that we used over and over and over. And the only thing I would say with using templates, especially if you have kind of boilerplate language that you use a lot, it's almost imperative that you have someone else read over those, because if you wrote the thing once and you write it the second time about something else, you better change all the names to the new set of names, because what you don't want is a report out there that says, Bill Stevens did this at this time, and then Jack Williams went to here, and then Joe Bob, whoever. It's just like, you want to make sure that you've corrected. My old boss used to call them gremlins, those holdover things in my friend Manny Suarez, who retired from the FBI, they call them go-bys. It's a report that you go by. They're great. They're fantastic. They save time. Be very careful with go-bys, because you can leave gremlins in there that can get you in trouble and make you look less credible. That's my only advice on that. Other than that, fantastic idea. Talking about memos, let's just see if we can, I'm going to share a memo real quick. And I've redacted this. I'm going to make sure that I've got one that is kind of relevant here. Okay, this is a good one. So this is a memo from a case I worked on a couple of years ago. It was a criminal case, and I have taken all of the identifying materials out of here, but I wanted to give you kind of a view of the way I approach memos. Number one, I try to stay active in the voice as much as possible. On Sunday, October, whatever, I approached the home of Stephen, located at this address at about 10:19 a.m. and attempted to locate and interview Stephen. It's clear, it's pretty to the point. I don't go into a lot of subjective stuff here. It's just, here's what happened, here's the order in which it happened. Kim, any comments on this? Can you see that? Is it on your screen?
I can see that. That's very Hemingway stuff right there. Very like subject verb, very full of information and not a lot of description that isn't needed. Right. And I like the active. There's none of this kind of, the individual was approached by the person who owns the vehicle, which I really like the subject verb stuff here.
Right. Let's go on down and we'll get to let's get to here. Yeah, all right. So I just kind of give you a heads up on the story. I'd been to this lady's house. She was apparently freaked out that I knocked on her front door on a sunny Sunday morning, and she called a friend of hers who was a police officer. He gets on the phone and kind of gives me a hard time, and I never knew who he was, but I needed to convey all of this information to the attorney. So this is kind of how I did that. Again, I've taken out all the identifying stuff, but it's descriptive, it's to the point, it's quick, and again, as a person who has trouble spelling, I try not to use too big of words along the way. But anyway, there's one example of a style of memo that you can use as a private investigator. And when we're talking about, Kim, this idea of passive voice and things like that, I'm going to pop up a couple of examples here real quick that are kind of, they'll show the viewers kind of what we're talking about here, application window. Okay, here's the thing. Can you see that, Kim?
I can see that.
Okay. I'm going to present it to everybody. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so this comes from, this is an example I found in a book that I referred to a lot when we were working on the course. It's called, I think that's where it's from. It's called The Sense of Style by Steven Pinker. And it's a great book. It talks all about effective communications and getting to the point. And so this is, I think it's a warning on a generator. And so what does that even mean? Like it isn't really telling, it's telling you a warning of some kind, but what does it really mean? So the second one gets to the point much better. Can you show that one, Hal?
Yeah, I'm going to pull that up real quick. Hang on.
So exposure to carbon dioxide might be harmful to you, is what that was saying. It doesn't really make a strong impression on me, let's say.
Here's the corrected version.
But that makes an impression. That tells me exactly what the problem with using a generator inside might be. I mean, if I don't know what CO2 is, you know, why would I even care about that previous warning? But this one, that gets the message across, and it will actually change my behavior. So this is an effective use of language, in my opinion.
Right. There are, I'm going to see if I'm going to open up a slide deck here. In the meantime, while this slide deck is opening up, we have a quote from, well, lo and behold, we have Miss Rochelle Davis says, and another useful practice I do is to simply step away from my own writing for a time, then come back and read it myself with fresh eyes. Sometimes that's my only option, and that is absolutely brilliant. I had an employer one time that made it very clear to me. He said, put it in a drawer, leave it there for 24 hours, then come back and read it the second time.
I think that's especially effective. I mean, sure, you'll see a little mistakes, but often if I'm working on a really complicated writing project and I am just having the hardest time, composing and doing a good job, the next morning, everything it feels so much clearer, and I can see the logical errors and what's missing and what doesn't need to be there. Just like Rochelle said, it's a great point.
Right. Let's go to this. I wanted to get a couple of these examples. We've talked a couple of times about active voice and passive voice, and I wanted to give you some examples of that, what would be a little bit clearer language. Kim, do you mind, can you kind of give us a real quick review of active versus passive? Yeah,
so active voice is just like we were talking about before in Hal's report, subject to verb. The cat ate the bird. Whereas, so in that case, the person or animal or whatever who is acting, the noun comes first and then the verb usually comes after. And so it's very clear, X is doing something to X. In the passive voice, the whole structure is kind of turned upside down, is reversed. So the bird was eaten by the cat. So you have the bird is being acted upon, but the bird comes first. And so you have to finish the sentence to know who is actually doing the action. There are times when the passive voice is useful, but
It happened with scissors.
yeah, but another, one problem with it is, first of all, you have to read the whole sentence to find out what's going on, number one. Number two, it often adds words to your sentences and it just gets longer and more complicated. And it's less interesting, honestly. And I see that construction a lot in some Pursuit magazine submissions. I think, to be honest, by people who have a great story to tell and a lot of expertise, but are maybe used to writing in report form, if you know what I mean. So yeah. I see a lot of the individual was approached by the owner of the vehicle instead of the man walked up to the car. So
I've got on the screen one of the examples we talked about earlier, and I'm going to read this out loud just because I get a kick out of it. The veracity of the subject statement as to his whereabouts during the event in question was called into question by the subsequent presentation of contradictory video evidence regarding his location at that moment in time. I have seen reports that sound and look just like this. Why do people do this?
I think people do it because it sounds more official and it makes them, they think it sounds more official and they think it makes them sound more professional because of words like veracity and contradictory and whereabouts and things like that. It's almost kind of like a suit of armor that people put on in the workplace, like either by using corporate jargon or by using the jargon of their profession. That armor makes them feel more official or respectable, but really it just clouds the issue with confusing big words. So I think people sound smarter and more professional when they get to the point. So what about the second version?
Yeah, here we go. Here's the cleaned up version. I think this is going to be
somewhat better.
Yeah. So investigators presented surveillance video which proved the subject was lying about his location.
Yeah, which would be even better. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another example, and I love this one. Investigator was approached by an individual whose garment had been set aflame. I've seen not this exact sentence, but sentences just like this in investigative reports. Sometimes they'll go as far as to say, your investigator, blah, blah, blah. I mean, here's the thing. I'm an investigator. I'm doing the work. The attorney knows I'm out there doing the work, talking to people. I tend to say, I did this, I did that. I don't tend to refer to myself as investigator. There are times when that might be appropriate, but 9 times out of 10, I take ownership of the things I do. But here in this sentence, investigator was approached by an individual whose garment had been set aflame. What might be a better way to say that?
Yeah, use the person's name, first of all. Who's the individual? Like, why are we even saying individual? So Fred or Ms. Medea's dress was on fire. She turned and ran toward me. Yeah.
And that sentence, that 2 sentences, both of which are really short, convey a lot more information than the other one. You now know who did it. You know that it was a female. You know her name. You know she ran towards. You know what I'm saying? You've learned so much more information from that than you do from the first kind of officialese version of the thing.
And I think that you can also add to that the use of industry jargon of any kind. You know, if you're in whatever industry you're in, whether it's law enforcement, private investigations, due diligence, you know, we as pilots, we have all kinds of fantastic jargon, and we use it with each other, and that jargon is clear when you're talking to someone else in the profession. But if you're communicating with somebody who's not in that profession, the jargon just doesn't help at all. In fact, it's very frustrating and irritating. And so the best thing you can do when you're writing something or communicating with an audience is consider who they are and consider what will be the most clear and understandable to them. Using jargon or using fancy words, it may make you kind of feel smart when you're writing it, but it doesn't make the reader feel smart. It makes the reader feel confused. So if you write well and you communicate something enlightening to your reader, that makes them feel smart because they get what you're saying.
Yeah, I had an expert witness one time who actually said, in prep for trial, he said, you know, my rule is if I can't convince them, I'll confuse them. So I've seen that kind of stuff. Good. This slide is one of my favorite ones. Good prose doesn't make people feel stupid. It makes them feel smart. If you're using language that is impossible for anyone else to understand and you feel really smart about it, but nobody gets anything out of it, it's not a good report. That's just kind of my thoughts on the thing. Okay, here.
The same thing, Hal, I would say goes for people who are writing for pursuit, for example. You know, I think one of the hardest things to do for a professional or for a journalist is to take an incredibly complicated technical subject and simplify it for someone who doesn't know the ins and outs of that, whatever that is, you know, whether it's, you know, let's say you're trying to explain the air traffic control system to someone who doesn't know anything about it. To simplify it for an outsider in language that still is correct, and it is very, very difficult. And so if you can manage to do that, if you can explain your complicated subject simply so that anyone can understand, that is real mastery of the language.
Right, absolutely, no doubt about that. It's good stuff. Let's move on to, I'm going to show another example of a sample report. This is an investigative report that I prepared for a client a couple of years ago. Since this was a report, it was a little bit more formal in construction, but I think I did a decent job of being pretty clear about a couple of things. Number one, and the main thing I wanted to point out in this one is down here. Okay. The second to last paragraph, you'll find attached a copy of my review of so-and-so's report. So-and-so's report is exemplary of quality appraisal work. I found no significant violations during my review. He provided a copy of his work file, which greatly assisted in the review process. The reason I put that up there and wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit is when you're doing this work, I think a lot of times investigators want to, and I've heard them say this, they want to bust somebody. They want to, you know, call somebody out for doing something wrong. That's all fine and good. If somebody's done a horrible thing and you've caught them, yes, call them out. At the same time, it's also nice when someone has been accused of a thing and they actually didn't do that thing, to call out the fact that they did good work and they cooperated. Point those things out. If a witness or a suspect, or, you know, if you're doing a workplace investigation, if the person under suspicion cooperates with you, point that on your report. You know, give everybody the chance to shine a little bit. Real quick, we're getting close to the end of the hour. I do want to share a couple more screenshots with folks talking about clarity and how to get your point across. Spelling can be critical. I have trouble spelling sometimes. It doesn't normally get me in too much trouble, but like this example, I mean,
awesome. That's great. I'm just trying to picture how that will play out.
The pimp hand is going to be strong somewhere in this equation.
Ouch. Yeah.
Here's another example of, you know, just how spelling can, this is actually a really sad one. Let's look at this here. Anybody see problem there? You had one job.
Communications fail.
And then here, one last one. I want to show these because I get a kick out of them, but this is one of my favorite ones.
I don't even understand how that happened. That's great.
All others will be towed. I mean,
nice. Yeah.
Okay, we've amused ourselves enough. Excuse me. I have a story that I tell quite often to illustrate the problems of communication. I did not discuss this with Kim, my wife and partner, before. we started this webinar, but there's an old story about this Australian guy on vacation in Scotland. And the Australian guy, sometimes you say one thing and somebody else hears another thing. These are communication problems. So the Australian guy is driving down the laneway in Scotland on vacation, and he sees this Scottish farmer out in the middle of the field having relations with the sheep. The Australian guy stops his car, he gets out, and he says, "Hey, mate, where I come from, we share those things." The Scottish man looks up and says, "Bugger off, man, I'm not sharing this with anyone." You have to pay attention to the things you say, and you have to pay attention to how you say things, lest you be misunderstood. Kim, let's talk real quick. We've got just a few more minutes. Let's talk really quickly about the communications course that we put together that is going to launch next week. What would you say would be the top 3 takeaways for an investigator for taking that course?
I think top 3 takeaways would be that making a good first impression is really important when running a business, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. But some of the simplest ways are, most websites only have a little bit of the written word attached to them, and so if you only have a few words on your website, they need to be the right ones, and you have to think so hard about what goes on there. So that's your ad copy, that's your marketing copy, and that's also someone is going to go to your website and decide whether or not to hire you. And so that website copy should be the thing probably that you work the hardest on. Takeaway number 2 is you can make your business go so much more smoothly if you communicate well. So that means with clients, with subcontractors, with employees, with fellow investigators. If you communicate constantly, manage people's expectations, let people know, like, for example, Brian Willingham talks a lot about how he has no intention of breaking the law for his clients. If you let a client know that up front, for example, or if you let a client know up front that it's going to take a lot of hours to get what they think they want, and they may not get it, then they're going to be a lot less likely to be unhappy when their greatest hopes were not fulfilled. So communicating up front, whatever that entails, managing someone's expectations, telling them the truth, being transparent, keeping in touch with them along the way, those things are really important. And then number 3 is a lot of us struggle with writing, whether you're a little bit nervous about writing an email to a lawyer, or whether you're not sure whether you should start a blog because you don't know if you're going to be good at it. I don't want anyone to feel that writing is something that you're either good at or you're not. All of us can improve. I definitely improve all the time. And the ways to improve are by practicing, by reading a lot of really good things, and by asking people who are good at this to have a look at your writing. There are a couple of things that I'll hold up here. So the elements of style, often known just as strunk and white by writing professionals, this is a great way to check up on, if you're having trouble constructing a sentence, you're not sure about a construction or a grammatical rule, this will tell you. I mean, this is the classic way to study this little book, and your style will improve immeasurably. And then this is just a fun read, The Sense of Style by Steven Pinker. He's a professor, and I really enjoyed this, and I got a lot of ideas for the course from this book. And he not only does he tell you a little bit about ways to improve your writing, but he kind of makes the case for why it matters. So I would say go read for pleasure, go study a little bit, practice, and get better. It's fun to communicate well. It's fun to write well. It's a superpower.
I just said all that without any mic on, didn't I?
I didn't hear anything.
Yeah, that was my fault. Bad communication on my part. We are bumping right up against the end of the hour. Kim, thank you so very much for taking the time to do this and putting up with me for the day. It has been a lot of fun having you on the show. We have, if you've been with us through the whole webinar, you know this, but we have a promo code for you. It is Jolly18, JOLLY 18. It's not case sensitive. There are no spaces in there. Jolly18 gets you 15% off of any course or course bundle at pieducation.com. It is 2 o'clock on Thursday, November the 29th, 2018. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host for the PI Education monthly webinar. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you so much, Hal. It was really my pleasure to be here with you.
All right, thank you. Goodbye, guys. Thanks.